This is Ben Gentry with the Socioeconomic Effect, and I was just going to follow up with a video podcast on the blog that I wrote entitled What the Naked Eye Cannot See. And if you read this blog, you'll see the kind of the scenario I put forth. Of course, this is a scenario that I created, and the names are all fabricated. But I believe this is a scenario that's not uncommon to many organizations. And you see right here below the formal structure of a marketing, finance, and manufacturing division. And you see kind of the way basically the work is supposed to be delegated. Now, often is the case where this is the way things are supposed to be done, and yet, if we look here below, the informal structure represents how things really do get done. And I'm going to blow up this social network analysis graph, and I'm going to talk about it for just a second here. So, I don't know how familiar you are with social network analysis, so I'm going to kind of start from the very beginning in describing what social network analysis is. Basically, social network analysis is graphing relationships. And within this graph, each of these lines represent information flow. So, information flow has become easier and easier for us to track because the majority of information flow now that occurs within an organization are done through computers. And it's very easy to follow emails, track emails, and gather information and kind of put them together into a graph, and so we can start to chart and flow to see the flow of information. And each of these obviously names are representative of people, and I've highlighted kind of in colored, I guess you'd say, the different names to represent the different areas or divisions that the people are in. So the red squares with the red names are the marketing division. The green is the finance division, and then the gray here are the manufacturing division. So we see very quickly in this picture who's playing a central role in the information flow. And that becomes very obvious with social network analysis because you see all the lines connecting to a very central figure here, Perez. Perez is very central because we have, let's count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people who are dependent upon Perez in order to get information. And it seems as though Perez becomes very obvious that he's the one that seems to be connecting the different groups together. So we have subgroup 1 here in the finance department. They are connected with each other, but in order to connect into another subgroup, which would be maybe over here, subgroup 2, the marketing department, they have to feed through Perez. And then subgroup 3, which is very well connected with each other, and yet they too are dependent upon Perez in order to communicate with the other departments, finance and marketing. So here, Perez, we have a couple of adjectives that we can use to describe him. One of them is information broker. Perez serves as an information broker in the sense that a broker is kind of the in-between between a client and a buy on the stock market. Perez holds that power where he can control information flow from the finance department and ultimately, how it even gets to the CEO here, Rogers, and the other departments as well. And so he becomes a very central figure and a very important figure in the dynamic of this group. Outside of Perez, we have figures like McCoy, Johnson, Howard, and Jones, others that are kind of peripheral figures in the sense that they're on the outskirts. Possibly they're being underutilized. Information flow is not as intense as it's coming from Perez or Perry or Thomas or others that are kind of more central figures. And so the idea behind all this is to kind of figure out, well, what's going on and how can we make the information flow within an organization more efficient. And so, first I think the first thing you have to ask is, why is Perez getting so much attention here? Why is there so much information flowing in or out of Perez? And there's probably a few different scenarios as to explain this and why this happens in an organization. Possibly, maybe one of them would be Perez is maybe very talented in many different fields, and so he has some experience in finance, but maybe also in marketing and within manufacturing, and so people like to go to him because of his experience, or maybe because of he's very socially outspoken and outgoing, gets along with people very well, and so people like to deal with him. Whatever the case may be, Perez is being overutilized. While in the case where we have someone like McCoy over here, it's not necessarily true that McCoy is not able to be utilized, or the sense that he doesn't have information or intelligence or something to add to the group. It may be the case that he's just not being accessed for that information. And so he's being underutilized, and he could be a very important resource in an organization. And I think what's happening here, and oftentimes what happens in organizations, is overutilization, which means overwork for Perez, while there are other people on the outskirts who could be being utilized and therefore making things more efficient. This is causing a bottleneck in information flow, and which ultimately causes the whole department to be less efficient in what's going on. And I think that's kind of the theme behind social network analysis turn inward in an organization, is to get information flow to reach its capacity, its peak, to involve the peripheral players like your Johnson, like McCoy, like I said, and others like Howard, and to get involved more, to see the information flow and ultimately get it working at its maximum capacity in order to produce the most efficient product or service or whatever your organization is doing.